Good afternoon and welcome to the Step 1 Preparation Tips Workshop. My name is Dr. Booker and I am a learning specialist in the Office of Learning and Teaching. And I'm excited to be here today. This is our last Wayne Live event for STEP preparation. But it's not our last event in total. And so we'll talk a little about that in the announcements. So what to look forward to for this session? All right, so the objectives of the session are to review announcements. We actually have a few updates and announcements in general as we get closer to the course starting. We also want to talk about identifying the CBSE and the CBSE strategies for dedicated study. In particular, there has been some changes to the CBSE, and so I want to kind of walk you through what both of these performance profiles look like, and also get you guys to start thinking about how you can utilize the information you learn from these, both the CBSE, the exam, as well as the self-assessments for the CBSSA, how you can use that information to inform your study time. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to define some really very specific tips for dedicated study. These tips have been generated from years of experience in working with students on STEP prep. It's been formulated from actually having meetings with students and actually learning what works and what doesn't work. It's also been formulated from data that we've obtained, school data. So there's a lot of good information that's going to be in those tips. Lastly, we're going to, well, not lastly, but we're also going to review what your study goals are. So every time we've had these sessions, I've asked students to really try to identify some study goals for yourself for pre-dedicated. And so I'd like to kind of touch on how that is working out for you guys, what types of goals you set for yourself, how those goals are working, and what types of goals you're thinking about for your future study. And then lastly, we'll go over some questions and answers. I'm hoping that we get a nice portion of students on here to ask questions. Unfortunately, this time we don't have a student representative here. Unfortunately, it's that time of year, it's November, and so everyone is getting sick. I've been sick a lot myself. And so the student that was going to join us today is not available. So you'll see a lot of me. But again, we're going to have a lot of good information. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so announcements. I like to start with just an overview of what we've done. And so, like I said, we've had a number of workshops. Oh, well, sorry, the Canvas page went live a long time ago, but the Canvas page is live. So if you haven't accepted your invite to the Canvas page, which is Step 1 Prep Class of 2022, sorry, please accept that invite. Get on there, start looking at the modules. There's a lot of great information on that site. So take some time to review that and get in tune with the information on the site. What about the workshops? So the pre-dedicated workshops that we've had so far are coming to a close. We did cancel last week's workshop because it conflicted with another program that was mandatory for students. And so we didn't want you to have to choose, right? So we canceled that one, and today is our last online workshop, but we do still have Step 1 days. I'm going to talk about that. But today is our last Step 1 Prep online workshop. In addition to that, though, we still also offer OLT and SPL individualized support sessions as well as group sessions. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the group sessions we're having. We also have provided RLOs and working on resources that are just in time, so when you need it, right? So we're working on building a portfolio or a system of some sorts that will be that will give you guys opportunities to get resources when you need it. Okay. So I mentioned that this isn't the end of our support. So we are doing Step 1's days, right? And so Step 1's days are Step 1 study plan clinics. These clinics are designed to offer students an opportunity to come into our suite and work with us one-on-one or in group settings. It's open, but to get an opportunity for you to really get some feedback on your schedule. Some students come to those sessions in mind with just getting some direction, like just getting started. Some students might come with their schedules already planned, and that's fine too. And some students might just have a few questions and they just want to pop in. That's fine. Whatever it is, stop by. We are having our next session on the 6th, which is Wednesday. So come to those sessions. I think that it'll give you an opportunity to really get some insight as to what those Step 1 schedules should look like. And so we'll have that session. The next session is November 6th. We did have one on October 30th as well. And so the next one after that will be November 13th. And they're all from noon to 4, and they're all in the OLT suite, which is Scott Hall 1313. In addition to that, I also want to talk a little bit about, the Step 1's day clinics in relation to what it can do for you. And this is something that we're not advertising, but I want to let you know that any student who gets a schedule approved at these Step 1's days clinics can actually waive the submission in January. So in January, everyone will submit a Step 1 study plan. But however, what we're offering to students who actually attend these clinics and get work done is that if you complete your Step 1's days study plan, you can actually, will approve that schedule for your dedicated study, which means obviously that we won't approve just anything. You really do have to meet the criteria for the study plan, which is posted in Canvas. The rubric is up. But if you meet the criteria and we approve it, that means that you don't have to submit a schedule in January. So if you want to get ahead and kind of get this out of the way, it is an advantage for you to attend those clinics. And that's something that we're not necessarily advertising, but I do want to make sure that I say it enough so that enough people hear that. And I'll post it. I think we have posted it in announcements on Canvas. So please tell your friends if you can make any of these clinics. We have 2 more. If you can get your schedule approved, you don't have to submit it in January. And it kind of takes a lot of weight off of your shoulder as far as trying to identify what it should look like. But if you need help, we're here to help. Okay. So now we're moving on to CBSE and CBSSA talk. So the CBSE score report, all students are going to take a CBSE on January 6th of 2020. What's going to happen is you all will meet and you will sit down and take, I think it's a half-day test, an exam, and it's called the Comprehensive Basic Science Exam. You're going to take that and you'll get your results back within a couple of days. It usually takes about 48 hours to get those results back. Sometimes it could take up to 72 hours, but you usually get them back pretty soon. And that CBSE should be used as a benchmark for kind of identifying where you are with what you've learned in the last 2 years, right, of medical education. That information should be used to help you inform what types of pieces of content or how you want to manage the content for your dedicated study period. It doesn't mean that you can't start dedicated study period before January 6th. Obviously you can, but this will give you a little bit more information about what your strengths and weaknesses are, okay? Something that's different this year that I want to talk about a little bit is this year, as opposed to other years, the actual score report has changed. And so what happened, sorry, I want to show you the score report, so bear with me. But what happened to the score report is it was updated. And so here is an example of what the score report now looks like. What you'll see is that I mean, I guess you don't know the difference between these score reports, but what you'll see is that now in the score report, students get directly from the beginning, you get your step 1 score. So you don't have to convert the score anymore. In the past, students had to take a score that ranged from 1 to 99 and convert it to a step score. But now they actually just give you directly the score. And as you can see, CBSE scores range from 1 to 300 and represent your overall performance on the examination. CBSE scores can be used to assess your readiness to take the Step 1 exam. What you'll also see in this score report is your performance as compared to other examinees. Sorry. And so looking here, what you'll see is that, again, the score that the student obtained was a 203. And what you see, and that's your score, right? But what you'll see is that the Step 1 minimum passing score is a 194, in case you didn't know. And you'll also see that this actually summarizes your overall performance on the test, right? So this provides you with an overview of what your score is, but also what the other students who are taking this assessment scored. So it gives you just a breakdown of how well you did as opposed to other students who are sitting for this CBSE exam. In addition to that, what you'll see in the score report is your relative strengths and weaknesses. And so this is a little bit different from the old report, but it does provide you with, as far as the subjects go, it provides you with what your score looks like. So, for example, this section illustrates your performance and the specified topic areas relative to your overall performance on CBSE. So this student, as I want to remind you, scored a 203. So that was their score. What this shows you is, in comparison to that overall score, how well the student did. So, for example, if you look at this area that has most of the content area highlighted under same, that actually means that the student scored around the same for these areas as composed to their overall score. So a 203 is about how well they scored on all of these areas, right? And it actually goes to the second page. So that's how well they scored. What you'll also see, though, is that there is a lower and higher area of performance as well. So these areas that are highlighted in the lower area shows that the student scored lower than 203 in these areas, okay? And they actually didn't score higher in any area on the test, okay? Something else I wanted to point out was understanding the content areas. So in addition to that, this report gives students a breakdown of the percentage of questions in each section. So if you'd like, a student could say, you know what, I scored really low in gross anatomy and embryo. So let me take a look and see how many questions were actually in that area. And what you'll see is it's about 8 to 15% of the questions. So it kind of gives you an idea of how much time you should be spending on reviewing each section. Obviously, it's in your best interest to review high yield content. So areas that have 45 to 58% obviously is an area that you need to pay attention to. So this kind of gives you a framework or an ideal way to build out your study time as far as the content is concerned. What is some really good news about this is that we're trying to plan to have someone come and actually talk about what all of this means, this new score report, and how it affects students, how you can use it. So stay tuned to more information about that. I don't want to kind of give you information too early, but we're trying to get MBME to come out and talk to you guys about this, because I think it's nice to hear from them because it's a new report. And they'll be able to provide you with a lot more information on this report and how you can use it to help inform your study time. So next up is I want to talk a little bit about the CBSSA score report. And so the CBSSA That means comprehensive basic science self-assessment. So emphasis on self-assessment. So you would not be taking this at the school, not per se, so we're not proctoring this, but it is something that is mandatory during your dedicated study period. And so all students must take the CBSSA on or before Friday, February 14th of 2020. So for the first time you have to do that. That's really an opportunity to gauge where you are in your performance, but also how far you've come from the CBSE, right? If students do not earn a 200 score on that first CBSSA, the first mandatory CBSSA, the student must sit for another CBSSA on or before Friday, March 13th of 2020. And all of this is located in the policy. It's also located in the syllabus that you all will be getting really soon. And so I say all that to just give you a framework for how the CBSEs will be used. And so the objective is to get a 200 or better. Obviously, we want you to earn a score as high as you possibly can. The CBSSA helps to provide students with a self-assessment. So it gives you an opportunity to learn where you are in performance and basically how well you would do on a test. What the CBSSA can do is predict your performance for sitting for the exam. And it kind of scores you as if you're sitting that day. So what the test says is if you sat for the exam today and you got a 203, I'm just using that because that was the report that we just looked at. But if you got a 203, that's more than likely what you would get if you sat today and took the test. So that's kind of why in the past policy said that students should sit for the test within 7 to 10 days of taking the CBSSA, because we didn't want to lose that effect, right? But that's kind of the framework for that. But it is a self-assessment. It provides you with rich information about your performance on STEP. I also want to look at an example of a CBSSA score report. So let me pull that up. So looks a lot different from what we just saw with the CBSE score report. This performance profile report is something we've used in the past, so I'm a little more familiar with how it works. So what you'll see at the top, the first thing that you'll notice obviously is the name and the date that you took the assessment, but in addition to that is an assessment score. And so this student scored a 210 assessment score. If we take a look at the pages that follow, what we'll see is that there is a conversion chart. And this is it here. And it'll tell you that if your CBSSA score was a 210? I think that's what the student scored. Let me go back up and check and make sure. Yeah, it was a 210. What you'll see is that the actual STEP score, it converts to a 167. So this student who sat for the CBSSA on January 1st of 1, they actually scored a equivalent of a 167. So if they were to sit today and take the test, they would get a 167, right? And so that is helpful because, again, it gives you an idea of where you are in your performance. Another thing I want to take a look at here is the graph, the performance graph. What this provides students with is an idea of what your low performance, borderline performance, and high performance areas are. What you'll see is there are performance bands. That's what we call these here, performance bands. And these performance bands are all different. And so what I've highlighted in the middle of the page is that the width of a performance band reflects the precision of measurement. So a narrow band indicates greater precision, right? Because some students are always asking, like, well, what do these bands mean? Because some are longer, some are shorter. So a narrow band would indicate that there is more precision, right, in performance. It also talks about what the asterisk means. And so you see that there are a ton of asterisks here. And what that indicates is that the performance band extends beyond the display portion on the scale. So that means that, unfortunately, for quite a few areas here, the student is off the charts low, right? They have off the charts low performance in these particular areas. But the good thing about taking these assessments is that if you had scores that look like this, you would still have time to improve that. And so that's the reason that you want to take these assessments, is to really gauge where you are in your performance, and so that you can improve, right? So it's not meant to show you anything but where you are and how you can improve, right? So what you'll see is there are areas of obviously off the charts low, but I have seen asterisks on the other side of the page where it's off the charts high, right? So, but this is an opportunity to gauge that. And what you'll also see is that there's borderline performance areas. A student might ask, well, if I get a performance profile that looks like this, where should I start? And I always tell students, no matter what, you definitely want to look at the lowest areas, or your areas of weakest performance, which is, your low performance areas. It might be taking a look at these asterisks where there's no bars. And this student actually had quite a few areas, 3 that I can identify. Well, we won't pay attention to physician tasks, but as far as the disciplines are concerned, there are 2 areas that are off the charts that we have not seen a bar for, and that's micro and immuno and path. So, you might want to start in those areas. But this is a really good opportunity, again, to learn where your strengths and weaknesses are. So those are those 2 reports. I just wanted to briefly kind of go over what those reports look like, because all of this can be really intimidating when you actually get into the dedicated study period if you've never seen this before. And I know you've seen score reports before, but because we're dealing with 2 different types, I really wanted to really show you what those look like. So lastly, how should we use those? So both of these reports should be used to help inform the content for your reviews, right? For how you, the strategic way that you're going to plan out your study sessions. Interpretation of the 2 performance profiles are different, obviously, because they look different. They have different criteria that help inform what's happening, but that doesn't mean that the knowledge you gain from those don't help support the same thing. They both are used to help judge where your performance is and how you can improve your performance. And lastly, I want to say that if you need support in interpreting this data, once you get it, you can always reach out to OLT. SBLs will also can also support you. But yes, OLT is here to help you kind of work through that and identify strategies for using these. So I just want to pause a minute and check and see if there's any questions. And there are no questions yet, but if you have some questions, you can just throw them up there. I know we don't have many viewers yet, but if you have some questions, just throw them out there and I will definitely get to them. So next is a conversation about tips and recommendations. So there is a document that I usually give to students when they come into my office and they need support with step prep. And this document is tailored to address kind of the go-to recommendations for how to get through the dedicated study period. It doesn't encompass everything. It's not everything you need to know about the dedicated period, but it does go over quite a bit of some of the best recommendations for the dedicated study period. So I do want to go over those in detail. And if you have any questions, like I said, just jump in. So before I get started with that, I do want to give you a note about where these recommendations come from. And so the recommendations that we're going to discuss are based on academic years, past academic years that I've worked with students. It's based on the Academic Advising Committee data that I've retrieved from my colleagues here. It's based on reports from faculty and staff and students. So it's not, it's not something that I kind of just developed on my own. This has come from years of experience and data, right? So here are the first set of recommendations. So the first thing that I always tell students is that, your UWorld QBank is the go-to resource for dedicated study. It should be your most utilized resource during dedicated study. So I always tell students that you at least want to try to get to doing 2 blocks of UWorld questions a day. If you can't start out that way, that makes sense. It takes a while to get into the swing of things, but doing 2 blocks of UWorld questions a day is really the go-to. And as you reach closer to your step 1 date, getting in 3 blocks is not uncommon. Okay, so doing 2 blocks a day is really the recommendation. Getting in those 2 blocks really kind of assures that not only you get to look at content in different ways, right? And this is really an active way to review content is through those questions, but it also gives you an opportunity to test your test-taking skills because we're doing these blocks in time mode. I always recommend that you do your blocks in time mode during dedicated study, but also that once you're getting into the habit of doing these questions, it really helps you with time management throughout the test taking experience, as well as just analytics. How am I analyzing these questions? Am I doing it within 90 seconds? Because that's how long you get per question. So it really helps you get through the test taking experience, and it helps to kind of sharpen your skills in that area. So UWorld questions should be done in time mode only. I just said that, but I have a bullet for that because students will tell me that, I've been working in tutor mode, and tutor mode is really helpful and it's helping me I time myself anyway, but it is still a different experience. And so I highly recommend that you do your questions in time mode only. Okay. And this is based on years of experience, but do your questions in time mode. The next thing is to review and analyze your question blocks directly after you've completed them. What I'll hear students say when they come in to meet with me is that, they did 3 blocks of questions and then they reviewed those questions the same day, but they reviewed one of the blocks the next day because they were exhausted. And I said, that really, what I've seen in the past is that that's not the best way to review your question blocks. It does take a lot of time to review the blocks. I can tell you based on experience that it takes students anywhere between 2 and 4 hours to review 1 block of questions. So that's why I say it's a process. And when you start out doing these question blocks like on a regular basis, it's going to take time to get into the swing of things. It's going to take time for this to become something that works well and is as far as strategy is concerned, but that's okay. But yeah, making sure that you review those question blocks directly after is really a healthy way to manage those question blocks, because what I've heard from students is that the longer they delay the review process of those 40 questions, the more that they forget what their thought process was for deciding on those answer choices. And so what you want to do, and the reason that you're reviewing these questions is not only to learn what you know, right? But it's also to identify your thought process and possibly strategies for how to get through the question. So I'm probably not in the same thought that I was in at 8 o'clock that I am at 5 o'clock. So if I start doing my questions at 8 a.m., I do a block at 8 a.m. and I don't review that block until 5 p.m., I might not remember why I chose certain answer choices or why I decided on changing a question because of whatever I was thinking. So reviewing your question blocks directly after you've completed them is the best rule of thumb. Obviously, you want to take a break if you need to, but having that review session directly after is a really good way to learn from your question blocks. Maintain at least 70% correct in your UWorld Q bank prior to sitting for step 1. This also should say prior to hitting reset on your Q bank. What I'll hear a lot from students is that they want to hit reset when they start the dedicated period because they really want to start fresh and get it all over with and just kind of get into a new experience with their questions. And so I always ask students, well, before you hit reset, do you have a 70% correct percentage in your Q bank? And the reason I ask that is because if you haven't obtained at least 70% correct, 1, you shouldn't hit reset because there's still a lot of information to be learned. And 2, you really have not mastered the material, right? So if you're hitting reset before you've been able to master the material that you've seen in this first pass, you're really not maximizing the use of your sessions, right? And then what's going to happen is, once you get a certain percent correct, you'll have an opportunity to hit reset, and it'll make sense. It'll make sense that you want to start fresh because you've reached a certain threshold. But until you get to 70%, I wouldn't hit reset, and I also wouldn't sit for the exam. Once you start to get 70% of your questions correct, what you'll start to see is that performance actually translates to your step score, but also to your assessments. So your assessments will start to improve as you gradually improve your performance in your Q bank. So what you want to aim for is at least 70% correct. You also want to make sure that if you're not at 70%, that you're really trying to be a little more critical about why you're not there yet, right? So if you're hanging out in the 50s and you can't seem to get improvement from that, you want to try to analyze why that is. What am I not doing? What can I improve to help improve my performance in my Q bank? One of those strategies I tell students is to really try to do your incorrect questions, and that's coming up too. So the next bullet says complete 2 full passes of UWork prior to sitting for step 1. I know you've heard that a lot. What this really means, though, is that you really need to get as much access to those questions, as much passes as those questions as you can. Your questions is your highest yield resource. You definitely want to use your questions the most. I always tell students to start your day with your questions. That way you'll get them done. But yeah, you want to get 2 full passes, and it really just means that you want to get as much contact with those questions as possible. Okay. After your first pass of UWorld, you definitely want to look at those incorrect questions, and you want to look at those before you hit reset. So again, before you sit and before you reset your Q bank, you want to get a look at those incorrect questions. Incorrect questions, it's going to be a tedious process to look at those. It's not going to be fun. It's going to feel exhausting. Doing these question blocks in general takes a lot of energy, but doing incorrect means that this is the toughest material you've seen by far, right? Because you're getting them incorrect. And so doing a full block of that can be exhausting. So I try to get students to think about, not just waiting until the end to do these incorrect questions, but kind of implementing strategies to get the incorrect questions done throughout your dedicated and not just at the end. So one way to do that is to embed, a block of incorrect maybe twice a week. That way it doesn't feel as tedious, and you're kind of working through those as you're working through the rest of the material. Okay. But yeah, doing incorrect blocks is where you're going to learn a lot. What I've seen in students is that their performance improves a lot after they've completed all of their incorrects, and usually you see spikes in scores. So definitely want to get the incorrect questions done. All right. So the next thing is to treat your questions as your top priority. And I've said that throughout already, but you definitely want to treat your questions as the most important resource. And so you want to at least do the 2 question blocks per day. And I've said that already throughout. The next thing is controversial, but I'm going to say it. Do not read first aid. And when I say don't read first aid, I don't mean do not use this resource. First aid can be a great resource, but that's what it is. It's a resource guide. It is not a textbook that should be read as from cover to cover, right? And so utilizing first aid in a strategic way is the best plan of action. So instead of using this as a textbook that I need to read from front to back, I'm going to utilize this in a way that is helping to build upon my deficits. And so one way to do that is to use this resource when you're reviewing your questions. So if I'm reviewing incorrect questions, my first aid text or my notes that I've annotated from this text should be near me so that I can reference this text when I come upon information that I don't know. Okay, so that's the best way to do that. And if you are dead set on using this resource and just reading, I always tell students that if you're going to read first aid, then definitely look at deficit areas, right? So don't waste your time on areas that you know well or that you're scoring high in. You want to take a look at the areas of content that you're not performing so well in. So you definitely want to use that resource in a strategic way. And during dedicated especially, you should not be reading that book from cover to cover. If you're doing that pre-dedicated, I tell students to go for it if that's what you want to do. But during dedicated, you should be focusing on questions and not reading first aid from cover to cover. Okay? The next thing is to create an assessment plan that is informed by using CBSSAs and UWorld Sims. So what do I mean by assessment plan? I mean an opportunity or a plan for you to really determine where you are. Throughout your dedicated study period, you should be informing yourself of where you are, where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses, what do I need to focus on for the next couple of weeks. You should be doing that throughout. And I always tell students that, sometimes it's a mistake to do these assessments week to week. I know that we have some students who are really dedicated to that strategy, though, that they're going to take an assessment every week. And there are some students that can do that and they perform really well, but there are also students who cannot do that strategy doesn't work for. And it's really based on your own performance, right? This is an individualistic process. Everyone is at different phases of learning, and we all learn differently. So all of that is to say that it really depends on who you are, but the recommendation across the board is to give yourself at least 2 weeks between assessments. Whether it's a CBSSA or a UWorld Sim, you want to give yourself time between assessments. One reason you want to do that is because you want to give yourself time to really reflect upon the assessment that you just took. So if I just took a CBSSA, it's going to take me some time after I do this 4-hour test, but it's going to take me some time after that to really review that, right? To go over my incorrect questions, to make sure I'm understanding where I'm struggling and where I'm doing pretty well. And that takes time. So sometimes it takes students a half a day, but sometimes it takes students a whole day to review that, right? So depending on that, it takes some time to do that, but it also takes time then to improve your deficit areas, right? So to work on the areas that you found from that assessment to be deficits, it takes time to do that. And I tell students that, giving yourself, 10 to 14 days is really ideal versus 7 days. So take that into consideration. I really highly recommend that you give yourself some time in between these assessments. The next 2 items here on the list are really reflective of your time spent studying. And so your medical students, I know that you guys go off the charts with your study time, and you study, for hours. I can't imagine how many hours you study. I've heard 14 hours a day students study for dedicated. And, I don't think that is the best thing, especially if you're not getting in the important pieces of rest, sleep. Sorry, rest and sleep are the same, but, meals and all of these things that I'm really reflecting upon are your wellness. So you have to get in wellness. If you're studying 14 hours a day, you're probably not getting a lot of wellness in. So here are some recommendations about how to approach studying. So I always tell students 5 to 6 days a week, right? And making sure that you implement self-care throughout that. And then if students can't do that, some students say, I have to study 7 days. Well, at least take half a day off, right? So take half a day, maybe the Sunday you start out by reviewing some questions in the morning, and then the afternoon you're just done with it, right? Give yourself some time to be away from the material. As far as learning science is concerned, you do need that diffuse time. You need that time to really kind of rest your brain, so to speak. And so if you give yourself that time, typically students do more, they perform better when they come back to the material. So give yourself that time to rest. The next thing is really specific about hours. So students say, well, how many hours should I be devoting to this? And I always tell them, you want to treat it as if it's a work day. So at least 8 hours, right? That means that if you start at 9, you'll finish around 5 o'clock, right? Give or take. So treating it like a work day, 5 to 6 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day is really ideal. Some students are obviously going to study more hours than that, and that's up to you. And some students are going to study less, but it really depends on where you are and what type of learner you are. So those are the recommendations that I have for students. I know that these recommendations are not they're not specific. I want to say that again, these are not tailored to every student. These recommendations will not meet the needs of all students, right? But they are meant to be recommendations for kind of like a framework of just how to start thinking about what the dedicated study period might look like for you. So I hope that it's done that. And if you have any questions about these recommendations, please reach out to me. Hopefully you guys are entering questions. I don't see any questions yet, but if you have any questions about those, please feel free to reach out to me, contact me. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is study goals. So we don't have a lot of viewers on right now, but has anyone set any study goals for their pre-dedicated study period? So right now, have you thought about any goals, or have you started to implement study goals around step prep? I'm going to go to the stream and see if anybody's thought about it. So the question again is, have you started to think about study goals? Have you set any study goals for yourself as it relates to step one? Are you implementing those goals right now? Where are you with your study goals? Have you thought about goals for the dedicated period? Goals and maybe working on your study plan? Have you started to do that? And I'm looking at the chat roll and I don't see any comments yet. But I'll just talk a little bit about the importance of setting study goals. Study goals can really help us to identify what our plan is, really. Having a goal helps us to really start to think about, what I need from this experience. So what do you need to accomplish? So setting a goal helps you to kind of come up with a list of how you want to move forward, what you need out of this experience. So for example, I've had students tell me that, they set the goal that they at least wanted to do X number of questions a week. And so that's a good study goal because that's helping you get through the material in a way that works for you. And everybody's different, so that's why I said X number of questions, because I don't want to create any anxiety for anyone, because everyone's different. Your study goal is different than mine. And so I really want to make sure that we understand that. But setting study goals are really important. You should be really thinking about what your study goals will look like in dedicated study period as well. And that really helps to inform your plan and your process for moving forward. So if I were you, one of my step one study goals would be, for dedicated anyway, would be, I'm definitely going to try to get 2 question blocks done a day, right? And I know this mirrors what I just told you about the recommendations, but I think that would be a really good study goal, is to say, every day that I study, I'm going to get 2 blocks of questions done, and then I can do other things, right? There's a question. It says, thought about them, but haven't made firm ones. And that's cool. I understand. You thought about, what the study goals might look like, but you haven't really, determined exactly what that looks like. And that's fine. We're still a little bit early, so we're ahead of the time yet. So it's okay. But to just start thinking about what that looks like is good. So I'm glad that you started to think about it at least. I want to ask another question as we are about to approach the question and answer period, but has anyone started to work on their study plan? So not just the goals, but has anyone started to work on your step one study plan based on, the rubric that we have on Canvas? Okay, so it's okay if you haven't. But those step 1 days, the clinics that we have, I'm hoping that students can come to those clinics and really get some good information about how to move forward. Even if you haven't started, you can drop into those clinics from 12 to 4 on Wednesdays for the next 2 Wednesdays and really get some help about how to approach that. The opportunity is there for you to even, forego the study plan submission in January. So if you get it approved during those clinics, if you get your step 1 study plan approved during the clinics that we have, you don't have to submit anything in January. And so I think that's an advantage, right? It puts you kind of ahead of this process. So if you can attend those clinics, definitely come to the clinics and work on your schedule. Show us what that plan, sorry, it's not schedule, your study plan looks like. As long as you're embedding what we ask for in the rubric, that meets the requirements. So we really want to make sure that you're thinking ahead about all of this stuff, because once you're dedicated, it's going to feel, for some people, it's going to feel lonely, right? It is an individualistic process. And so we want to help at least take away some of the anxiety about what to do or how to plan, okay? Excuse me. So within our last 15 minutes, I'd like for us to go over some questions. So this is your opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to do my best to answer any questions that you might have about step 1 study, your step 1 study period. I see that there's not many people online, and that's okay. But if you have questions, here's your time to ask any questions you might have, and I'll do my best to answer your question. So I'll give people time to think about what their questions might be. Anything that you thought about, the presentation that you had questions on. Okay, we have a question. It says, I used CramFighter to just get an idea of what a 7-week schedule might look like. Have you heard anything about that resource? Yes, actually I did. It was a resource that was recommended by one of our SPLs, our step prep leaders. And it actually, we talked about it in one of our live streams. I think it was the first one. And it was a resource that was recommended. CramFighter, I think, can be a really great resource, especially for students who need that support with managing their time along with planning, right? And so I think it's a really good resource. What I'll say, though, is that I've also heard students say it's not for me. So it really depends on the person. What was your experience with CramFighter? Did you have a good experience with it? You said that you used it to get an idea of what a 7-week schedule might look like. What are your thoughts? What I can also say about time management and scheduling and planning is that it takes a lot of thought. So I tell students, the first thing you want to start with is what you know. And so what you know, based on the course anyway, is when you have to take certain assessments. You know that you have a CBSE on January 6th. You know that you have to take the CBSSA on or before Friday, February 14th. Those are things that you know. So you can automatically embed those into your schedule. You should know, most of you should know what your step date is. So embedding that into your schedule. And those things help to guide how you're going to study, when you need to rev up your performance, when you need to take an assessment on your own. But also you'll know your personal things. You'll know what travel you have. You'll know what Wayne State stuff you'll have in January. And I say that with a smile on my face, but you'll know those activities. And so first start with what you know. And then you kind of build upon that. You build upon that based on content that you're going to embed into your schedule. And some students say, well, how will I know what content to add until I get the results from the CBSE? And I really want to emphasize the fact that you know now. You know now what types of content that you struggled with in the past. You know now what areas of or what content areas you've had that you felt weren't comparable or on par with the other material that you've learned. So you want to start there, right? You can start there in December with that content. And then once you take your CBSE, you'll have those results to kind of add to your knowledge of where you are and where your performance is. So you'll have a layer of resources that'll be able to provide you with ideas about what content to work on. So that is my thing there. I like the schedule, but I'm not sure if it's too much scheduled in one day. Yeah, that's a really good point. I know that it gives students, sometimes it gives students anxiety when there's their schedule is too fixed. And so that's why, you know, with these study plans, I tell students that it is a number of ways that you can submit these. They do not have to be, you know, a 7 week schedule. It can be. I want to say that it can be, but it doesn't have to be that. So it could be that you submit to us a schedule that provides us with a 1 week overview of what the 6 weeks will look like, right? A framework. So that means, you know, every day I'm going to get up at the same time, and at the top of the day I'm going to do 2 blocks of questions and review those blocks. That's going to take me, you know, 6 hours to do that. I'm going to have a lunch break in between that, and then after that I'm going to review content by using these resources. That's a way to do it. Some students say, you know what, I don't want to do a schedule at all. I want to do, you know, a narrative where I actually explain what the plan is. And that's okay too. There are so many ways to meet the requirements of your study plan, and it really depends on what works for you. So the comment you made about, you know, it kind of being overwhelming to get all that stuff in one day, I think it's real. I know, I've heard it before. And so just know that you don't have to do that. That's not something that you have to do. One thing that I know works really well for students is to say, you know what, every day or at least every week, I have a plan and I have goals that I want to meet each week. So maybe creating a list of goals, right? I still have a structure. So I have a structure. I'm going to study between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. But every week I have a goal. You know, this week I want to get through at least 12 blocks of questions this week. This week I want to do, I want to review all of Dr. Bosch's lectures. You know, there are different ways to set your goals, but having that set every week can be really helpful too. And it can take you out of that minute scheduling where you're scheduling to the hour, because that can be really tedious and it can be hard to keep up with, right? It also can be anxiety prone because when you don't meet those deadlines and those tasks that you've embedded into the schedule, it can be really overwhelming. So I definitely understand what you're saying. So we have a little bit of time left. Any other thoughts, ideas about your study plan or dedicated study? Any questions? Before we end, I guess I do want to go back to the slide where I talked about what's coming ahead. So I really want to emphasize these, the Step Wednesdays clinics. So just to reiterate, these clinics are happening for the next 2 Wednesdays. We had one last Wednesday, and we have 2 more coming up. The clinics are really designed to help students get support for how to build a Step 1 study plan. And it's also an opportunity for students to get their Step 1 study plan submitted and complete before this Step 1 dedicated period. So I think it's a really good opportunity. They will all happen at the same time, at the same place. So they're all in the OLT suite, our new suite, 1313 in Scott Hall. We welcome all students. We try to make sure that we have SPLs present so that you can get both an OLT and SPL perspective. And trust me, they do overlap, but we want to make sure that we're give you an opportunity to learn from your peers. So these clinics are happening please show up. The opportunity here is that you can get your study plan approved in advance. So then come January, you don't have to deal with that. It's all done. You have your framework, right? You may not have specific content in your schedule yet. That's okay, but you'll have your framework for how you plan to manage your time during dedicated study, and that's really important. So we welcome everyone to join us for those. We also welcome faculty and staff to come to those because everyone has some insight and some contributions that they could make to these. So we want everyone to be a part of these workshops. So with that said, I think that there are no more questions. I do want to wrap this up by saying that OLT is here to support you throughout this period. Just because the sessions stop on November 13th doesn't mean we won't be working with you. Another last minute update is that you will be getting your Step 1 study, your Step 1 prep syllabus soon. I know students have been asking, when are we going to see that? You will see it soon. We will have it out as soon as we can, but it is on our radar. We are working to get it complete. And we look forward to working with you. If there's no questions, I want to check the questions one more time. Oh, there is another question. Okay, so it says, for right now, while we're still doing regular schoolwork, do you think we should be doing some step prep when we have the time, like incorrect URL blocks, or will that contribute to burnout? That's a good question. So, doing step prep while you're embedded in the curriculum can be taxing or difficult for some students. So what I want to say before I even give an answer is that everyone is different. So when you said if we have the time, it makes me think that you do have extra time that you can be devoting to step prep. And if you do, of course, you definitely want to be going over as many questions as you can. Because that is all contributing to, helping to build not only your test taking skills, but also to get in that review of the content that you haven't seen in a while, right? So you definitely want to do that if you can. And for many students, it doesn't contribute to burnout. It really depends on who you are. Because, for example, if I'm a student who started doing intense step prep, pre-dedicated, 2 months pre-dedicated, technically that's where we are now, 2 months pre-dedicated, and I actually have a study period where I go all the way from January to the end of March, so I take the test at the very end. Obviously, I have a higher chance of having burnout. But another student who started 2 months pre-dedicated with intense step prep and they went through, February, might not have that same experience, right, when they sit in February for the test. So it really depends on who you are. There's a lot of other factors. That's just one example of how you can interpret that and take that. But across the board, we tell students that you should be embedded in step prep. One thing I want to remind you too is that step prep is a part of the curriculum. So if you are doing well in the curriculum, if you are learning, if you are excelling, if you are average or above average in your coursework, that really does say that you should have a solid foundation in your basic science and that you will probably perform very well. And so I like to remind students of that because what you're doing now is step prep, right? The things that you're doing is step prep, and enhancing that or intensifying what you want to do for step prep is really an individualistic choice. So I said all of that to say that I can't directly answer that for one student that I don't have a lot of information about. But yeah, it can contribute to burnout for some, but for some, they wouldn't necessarily hurt them. All right, so we have about a couple, not even a couple, we have a minute and some seconds left. Any other thoughts or questions? All right, so as the time ticks down, I just want to say to students that, again, OLT is here to support you. We are working on, revving up all of the resources in our Canvas page. We'll have a syllabus out to you really soon, and we plan on bringing MBME here to talk to students about the new CBSE Performance Profile Report. And we'll follow up with more information on that as we get it, but I just want to kind of throw it on your radar to look for more information about that. We are here Wednesday working with students on schedules, study plans, sorry. So please join us for those clinics. We really appreciate you watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Dr. Brennan. All right, so with that said, I want you guys to have a great one. Bye-bye.